Okay, so you're looking into high security locks for your home. Good thinking. I remember this one time someone tried to pry open my old apartment window, and, well, let's just say I'm all about feeling safe and sound these days. And especially in Australia, everyone's saying high security locks are like the gold standard. But what does that even really mean? We're doing a deep dive into this excerpt you sent, all about why it's so important to get a professional to install these things. Like, we get that it's better, but this is about really getting into the why, the stuff most people miss.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in just the lock itself,
Yeah.
but it's the installation where things get tricky. That's where a lot of the hidden dangers pop up.
It's all about those sneaky risks even someone who's super careful with DIY could miss. Like the excerpt mentions misalignment. And we're not just talking about your key getting stuck here. This is about like actual security
Oh,
problems.
absolutely. Imagine someone's like slipping a credit card between the door and the frame just because there's a tiny gap, right? That's a classic break-in trick, even
Yeah.
on doors with decent locks.
Yeah.
It's like you've got this top-notch security system, but you left a window wide open kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if it just being a little bit off can be a weak spot. What about the whole picture? The excerpt talks about how this all ties into the kinds of building materials they use a lot in Australian homes. Yeah, we see tons of timber-framed houses here in Australia. Super charming. But they can be easier to break into if the insulation isn't like rock solid.
Mhm.
Think of it this way. You could have the fanciest, most expensive deadbolt in the world, but if it's stuck on this flimsy old door frame, kind of defeats the purpose.
Like putting a sports car engine in a shopping trolley, not going to win any races, right? And speaking of things that fall apart, the excerpt talks about how bad installations actually make the lock wear out faster. That's a hidden cost of doing it yourself. Most people don't even think about it.
Totally. Even if you get it lined up perfectly at first, if it's not installed right, it puts a ton of stress on the lock. You'll just end up replacing it sooner, which, like, what was the point of getting a high security lock in the first place?
And let's not forget about warranties. The excerpt mentions this quickly. All those fancy new high security locks come with great warranties, but usually only if a pro installs them.
Exactly. Can you imagine going through all the trouble of installing it yourself, only to find out you voided the warranty and then it breaks? Suddenly, trying to save some money ends up costing you way more in the long run.
So we've talked about why trying to install these high security locks yourself is a recipe for, well, disaster. But that brings up a whole other question, right? How do you even find the right locksmith for the job?
Right, because not all locksmiths are the same.
Exactly. The excerpt talks about this too. Like, it got me thinking about those ads you see everywhere. We fix any lock.
It's like anything else, right? You wouldn't go to, like, a foot doctor if you needed brain surgery.
Definitely not.
So just because someone can install a basic doorknob, that doesn't mean they're the right person to handle a high security system.
Makes sense. It's all about specialists. Speaking of which, the excerpt really stresses how important certification is, especially in Australia. And I know certifications are important everywhere, but is there something specific about them down under?
Well, Australia takes its security pretty seriously, and that means having some strict rules. So when you see a locksmith with a valid Australian security industry license, it means they've been thoroughly checked and they stick to really high standards, which is kind of reassuring when you think about it.
Especially with those stories you hear about shady locksmiths, you know? Yikes. So certification equals peace of mind. But it's not just about being allowed to install locks, is it? The excerpt also mentions how important it is to find someone who specifically worked with high security locks before. Why is that such a big deal?
Think of it like this. High security locks, those are like the luxury cars of the lock world. You've got intricate mechanisms, specialized parts sometimes even, like secret technology that only they know about. You don't want just anyone messing around with that, right?
Yeah, that's making me think twice about who I'd trust with my car, too. And my home security, that's way more important. Okay, so we've covered certifications, we've talked about experience with these high-tech locks, but the excerpt also mentions local knowledge. Now, I get how a local plumber might know the neighborhood pipes, but what does that have to do with locksmithing?
You'd be surprised. A local locksmith, they'll know the types of houses in your area, what they're built with, even what break-in tricks are common around there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they might spot something about your house someone else would miss. It's about putting together all the pieces of the puzzle, your locks and everything around them.
So it's like they're not just putting in a lock, they're installing it, knowing how people might try to get past it.
Exactly. They're thinking about all the local risks, not just treating every house the same.
That makes a lot of sense. But I have to ask, this level of expertise, it can't be cheap, right? How do we justify that, especially if we're on a budget?
I hear you. It's definitely investment up front, But think of it this way. What are the costs you avoid by getting it done right the first time?
That's a good point.
We're not just talking about replacing the lock every few years here. Think about what happens if someone actually breaks in.
Oh, right. That's a whole other level of expense and stress.
Exactly. Replacing stolen stuff, fixing any damage. In Australia, that can easily cost you thousands of dollars. And that's not even factoring in how violating it feels to have your home broken into.
It's true, that feeling of safety and security is priceless. Which reminds me, the excerpt really emphasizes peace of mind as a big benefit of going pro, and it made me realize that's something people don't often factor into the cost of security.
Absolutely. When you know your home is truly secure, you can relax and focus on the things that really matter.
Well said. So, to wrap up our deep dive today, it's clear that getting a professional to install high security locks isn't just about getting the job done, it's about investing in long-term security, avoiding those costly mistakes, and getting that priceless peace of mind.
I couldn't agree more. The real cost of security goes way beyond that initial price tag.
That's a great point to end on. And for our listeners, next time you're looking at locksmiths, think about what we've discussed today. What matters most to you when it comes to your home security? Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.